Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Across State Lines. I'm your host, Danielle. Thank you so much for tuning back into the podcast for episode 21, where today we will be discussing two cases: the strange death of Devin Eugene Williams and the murders of the Fisher family. While the cases aren't connected in any way and happened years apart, both cases have ties to the Tonto National Forest, which is located about 88 miles to the east of Phoenix. In 1995, 29-year-old Devin Williams was driving his semi-truck from Kansas through Phoenix when he wound up barreling through a dirt road in the Tonto National Forest. Many witnesses saw him and even interacted with him, and reported that he was behaving strangely and was saying things that didn't make any sense before he disappeared. Sadly, 2 years later, his skull was found, and Devin Williams was declared dead. No one knows why Devin wound up in the forest, but many theories abound as to what happened to him that day, including a mental break, a hijacking situation, or a kidnapping. But sadly, his case is still cold nearly 30 years later. In 2001, an explosion rocked a small suburban community in Scottsdale, Arizona, which when put out revealed 3 people had died within the home. However, it wasn't the explosion that caused their deaths. Each person had been brutally murdered, all 3 having their throats slit. The victims were 2 children and their mother, and their father, Robert Fisher, was nowhere to be found. Before he left the home, he set it up that the house would explode after he exited, and while many people believe that Robert Fisher is long dead, many others believed he made his escape and hid out in the Tonto National Forest before fleeing the country. Now, before we dive into the cases, I just want to remind everybody that Across State Lines is available on all podcast streaming platforms, such as Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else that you might listen. If you are liking Across State Lines and would like to leave us a rating, a review, or a follow, it would be greatly appreciated. If you would like to leave us any feedback, go to our website and send us an email. Thank you so much for listening, and now, let's dive into the cases of Devin Williams and Robert Fisher. In May of 1995, 29-year-old Devin Eugene Williams held a job as a long-distance truck driver, often hauling produce from the Midwest to the West Coast. He was a married father of 3 children, raising his family in America's Kansas, and life was good for the young family. The couple had just purchased a new home and were in the process of making plans for their house, as well as their future. Devin's wife would later go on to say that this was the happiest point of their marriage, the spring right before he disappeared. Devin was described as a pleasant and patient man, with a coworker saying the only times he ever saw him get irritated was when he had to wait for his truck to be loaded, as he was eager to get back home to his family, often missing them while he was gone. On Sunday, May 28th, in Arizona's Tonto National Forest, the silence that nature provided was suddenly interrupted by the sounds of a 48-foot, 10-ton 18-wheeler semi-truck barreling through a remote forest road. Nearby campers, Lynn and Jack Yarrington, stated that the road wasn't large enough for an 18-wheeler and that they only ever would see 4-wheel trucks use the road, and even then, only sparingly. Jack and Lynn claimed that the 18-wheeler continued to drive back and forth on that road at a high rate of speed for much of the day. Other campers had a close call with this same semi-truck. The 18-wheeler drove right at them head-on, nearly running them over. The campers were able to reverse in time and get out of the way, but stated that the driver of the truck stared straight ahead with no expression on his face, almost as if he was looking right through them and didn't recognize anyone was in front of him at all. The witnesses instantly felt that something wasn't right. Later on in the day, a group of people having a picnic stumbled upon a semi-truck now stuck in a field. They left their vehicle to speak to the man standing next to the truck. One of the men in the group, named Charles Hall, asked the man how he got his truck stuck in the mud. The man replied, quote, "They made me do it." This prompted Charles to ask him, "What?" And the man muttered under his breath, quote, "No, you can't help me out. I'll never get it out of here. I'm going to jail." When Charles heard the man mention jail, he thought something sinister might be going on, such as a carjacking, hostage situation, or kidnapping. Charles stated that he wondered if there was another person in the cab of the truck, possibly holding a gun on the man. Despite the strange situation, the truck driver made no attempt to ask them for help, nor keep them there with him. Later in the afternoon, a report came into the local deputy, Deputy Wells, about a truck stuck in the heart of the forest. The deputy was confused, just like the campers, how such a large truck would end up within the forest at all. When he went to investigate, he discovered the semi-truck stuck in deep mud within a meadow. This meadow was located near Forest Service Road 137 in the Buck Springs area, nearly 20 miles from Highway 87. Once Wells looked inside the truck, he discovered the cargo within undisturbed and intact: 1,200 boxes of lettuce and strawberries, with the refrigeration unit still running. No one was near the abandoned vehicle, and the cab was locked. The deputy checked his national crime computer and learned that there were no reports submitted for either a missing truck nor a missing truck driver. He stated that when he peered through the window of the cab, that the inside was very clean, and there were no indications that foul play had taken place. At 4 p.m. that same day, Lynn and Jack Yarrington were driving through the forest along Forest Service Road 321 when they came upon a man off the side of the road near the trees. The man was partially kneeling on the ground, staring at a tree. The man was mumbling to himself, but they weren't able to make out exactly what he was saying. Jack asked the man if he needed any help or assistance, and the man simply said, quote, "I've got to light the grill." The man was holding a $20 bill in his hand and hitting it repeatedly with a rock, as if to start a fire. The couple, confused, looked around, but they didn't find any evidence of food that he may want to grill. In fact, he had nothing else with him at all. The man then threw a rock at the couple's car, and they decided it was time to leave, getting in the car and driving away. This was the last confirmed sighting of Devin Williams. When no one heard from Devin that day, and he was off schedule for his delivery, he was reported missing. Although those who knew him were certain that Devin wasn't the type to abandon his truck, investigators had linked the missing man to the situation in the Tonto National Forest. Eyewitnesses were certain that the man acting strangely in the woods that day was the same man in the photos they were shown, Devin Williams. Investigators began to track Devin's movements leading up to his disappearance. They learned that Devin had left his home on May 23rd, heading west. This was the route he took many times. He successfully delivered his haul to California and reloaded his truck for his trip back to the Midwest. Devin spoke to his boss, Tom Wilson, that evening, with Tom stating later that everything seemed normal, that Devin was on time, and everything was going seemingly well. On Saturday evening, May 27th, Devin made his way into Kingman, Arizona. He would phone his work headquarters for the last time, telling them that he was unable to get any sleep, but that he was determined to get back on the road. After this, Devin was meant to arrive in Kansas City, Missouri on Monday morning, but he never made it out of Arizona. Detective Bruce Cornish went on to say that drugs, mental health, nor criminal history were factors in Devin's disappearance. How he came to this determination is unknown, as mental health issues can appear out of the blue or could be hidden from friends and family. He went on to note that it was possible that Devin ran away on his own accord, pointing to the fact that his briefcase, ice chest, and sleeping bag were left in the truck, but that his duffel bag and favorite audio tapes were missing. For this to have happened, though, the entire episode in the forest on that Sunday would have needed to have been an act. In the absence of any real evidence, investigators only had theories to work with. A search was conducted for Devin using foot patrol, search dogs, volunteers, and off-road vehicles, but all searches came up empty. No scraps of clothing, bone fragments, nor any trace of which direction Devin may have gone were discovered. The deputy involved in the case said that he had conducted many missing persons searches, and not one had been conducted where they had not found the person, except Devin's. On May 2nd, 1997, hikers were walking along the bottom of the Mogollon Rim near the intersection of Forest Road 321 and Rim Road 300 in Gila County, about a quarter of a mile from where Devin was last seen. This is an area that had already been previously searched for Devin. There, they stumbled upon a human skull. Dental records would later go on to confirm what many thought: the skull did belong to Devin Williams. There was no evidence of foul play on the skull, and no other remains were discovered. They were unable to determine Devin's cause of death based on the skull alone, and it is still unknown what exactly happened to him. Many would go on to speculate a few theories, which lead to his erratic behavior: a diabetic episode, sleep deprivation, mental illness, drug use, or carbon monoxide poisoning. None of these theories have been confirmed, and the mystery of what happened to Devin that day in 1995 still remains. Devin's wife, Mary Lou, still holds out hope in finding out what happened to her husband, but says that hope diminishes with each passing day. During the time of Devin's disappearance, but before the discovery of the skull, Mary Lou stated that her children had a very rough time. Some days they would be fine, and other days they would ask her if their dad was ever coming back. She had no clue how to answer them, simply saying that she didn't know, but if he doesn't, he is up there with God. With the discovery of his skull, they were able to find closure in his death, but not the circumstances that led up to it. The family would go on to sue the trucking company, but it is unknown what became of this. Now, let's move on to the case of Robert Fisher. On the morning of April 10th, 2001, at 8:42 a.m., a gigantic explosion rocked a quiet suburban neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona. The explosion, which was strong enough to rattle the windows and frames of every home within 1/2 mile, also took down the front of the house of which it originated. At its strongest, the fire had flames leaping 20 feet into the air, with secondary explosions going off every so often. The secondary explosions, due to either paint cans or rifle ammunition within the house, kept the firefighters from immediately approaching the burning home. One firefighter was injured on the scene. Neighbors reported hearing loud arguing coming from the home the night before, around 10 p.m. The house was owned by a family of 4: Robert Fisher, his wife Mary Fisher, whom he was married to for 14 years, and their 2 children, Brittany, who was 12, and Bobby Fisher, who was 10. Once firefighters entered the home, they discovered 3 bodies still lying in their beds as if they were asleep. Mary was found in her bed, shot in the back of her head with her throat slit. They entered Brittany's room to find her in bed with her throat slashed from ear to ear. Bobby suffered the same fate as his older sister. Police believed that the motive for the murders was that Mary was set on divorcing her husband, and that Robert did not want his children to go through what he had as a child. It is theorized that once Robert Fisher brutally murdered his entire family, as they lie bleeding out in their beds, he disconnected the furnace from the gas connection and placed a burning candle nearby, ensuring that the house would explode within a few hours. In fact, this process gave Robert about a 10-hour head start. Robert also doused his bedroom and the bedroom of his children in gasoline to ensure that the evidence was destroyed. At 10:43 p.m. the night prior to the explosion, Robert was seen on an ATM surveillance camera in his wife's car, where he withdrew $280. Robert was never officially seen again. Days later, Mary's car was found abandoned in Payson, Arizona. Police believe at this point that they had Robert cornered. A camper had recently seen Mary's car and the family dog, Blue, near his campsite. Despite this, a sewer camera that had been set up in the area had captured no trace of Robert anywhere, and this led police to conclude that Robert had left the car and Blue at the site as a red herring before ditching them both. Robert Fisher was born on April 13, 1961, in Brooklyn, New York. He grew up with his parents and 2 sisters when his parents divorced in 1976. After this, Robert moved to Arizona with his father and sisters, where all three attended Saguaro High School in Tucson. Robert was reportedly torn up about his parents' divorce, and his friends and relatives say that it had long-lasting effects on him. When Robert became an adult, he joined the United States Navy with hopes of becoming a Navy SEAL, but he was unsuccessful. He briefly worked as a firefighter before having quit due to a back injury. After this, Robert went for a career change and entered the medical field. He was employed at the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale and worked as a respiratory therapist and surgical catheter technician at the time of the murders. Prior to his medical career, Robert married his wife in 1987. He was described as very controlling and extremely distant, with the couple fighting about sex and finances quite often. Robert reportedly once turned a garden hose on his wife when he felt that she had spoken out of turn. Robert, who was an avid outdoorsman and fisher, was reportedly embarrassed that his son did not like to hunt or fish, and equally embarrassed that his children couldn't swim. Apparently so embarrassed by this fact that he had once thrown both of his children off of a boat in order to teach them how. A family friend said this about the situation on the boat, quote, "They were crying and Brittany was screaming, and he pulled them back in the boat and said, 'Now, there, how's that?'" End quote. Friends describe other concerning behavior exhibited by Fisher leading up to the murders, with one describing a time that Robert had killed an elk and smeared the blood on his face. Another instance, Robert snuck up behind a family that was having a picnic and emptied his gun into the air. And, on another occasion, Fisher had shot and killed a pit bull. Robert claimed that this was because the pit bull attacked a Labrador retriever, but police believe that Robert had set this up in order to kill the animal. In 1998, Robert had visited a massage parlor and had a one-night stand with a sex worker. Concerned that he either had an STD or urinary tract infection from the sexual encounter, Robert was worried that Mary would find out. After Mary had found out, possibly due to Robert confessing, she had planned to end the unhappy marriage and was going to divorce Robert. The decision to divorce was weeks before the murder. Police had found Mary's vehicle near the Tonto National Forest, near Payson, and this led the investigators to believe that Robert was hiding out in the forest, using his skills as an outdoorsman to survive. When they found the vehicle, they also found Robert's hat, which he had worn in the ATM footage, as well as a pile of human feces next to the passenger door. While investigators searched the nearby area, they had only searched one cave out of a handful of caves nearby. These caves had a vast underground network that extended for miles under the surface. In the years after the murders, professional cavers did search these caves looking for evidence of Robert or his body, but nothing was ever discovered. The Fort Apache Indian Reservation was nearby where the vehicle was found, but this too was never searched. A pair of footprints were found leading to the reservation, but when police followed these footprints, no sign of Fisher were uncovered. A couple had reported seeing a man a few days earlier walking along the nearby Young Road, days before the car was discovered. The woman looked at her husband and said, "That looks like Robert Fisher." Despite this, the couple waited to report the sighting until after the vehicle had been discovered. On July 19th, Robert was issued an arrest warrant for the three murders and listed as a fugitive. In 2002, he was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, and then he was taken off the list in November of 2021, despite never being found. In the years after the murder, neighbors reported possibly seeing Fisher drive around the neighborhood, stopping near his old house. Thousands of leads came into the investigators about the whereabouts of Robert, but it appears that he has either eluded being caught or has long since been dead, with some speculating that he took his own life. The only happy note in this story, I'm thankful to say, was that Blue was found alive and unharmed near the abandoned vehicle and was placed with the new family. When last seen, Robert was described as standing 6'1" and weighing 190 pounds. He has blue eyes and brown hair and has surgical scars on his lower back. He also has a gold crown on his upper left canine tooth. He is considered to be armed and very dangerous. If still alive, he would be 61 years old. When I first wrote about Robert Fisher and posted the article to Reddit, a Reddit user messaged me and told me that he believes he had an encounter with Robert Fisher in the Tonto National Forest shortly after the murders. He claimed that a man came up to him and was acting very strangely, and he had a dog with him as well. He stated that the man looked like Robert Fisher and was absolutely convinced that Fisher had escaped into the Tonto National Forest before escaping further south. Theories on where Robert Fisher could be are divided, with many people believing that he took his own life shortly after the murders or he fled and escaped into Mexico. Unfortunately, 23 years later, he has never been found. Thank you so much for listening to Across State Lines, and we will be back next week to dive into another unsolved case. Please follow or subscribe to Across State Lines on your podcast listening platform so that way new episodes will drop directly into your listening feed. If you'd like to rate or review Across State Lines on whatever platform you listen to, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much, and join us again next week.